Hello, my name is William James. I'm the host of The Bald Book Geek. How are all of you? As always, like, subscribe, hit that little bell icon that's somewhere down there. Tell me what you think in the comments. So Neil Gaiman is a writer that I absolutely adore and someone I discovered in my teen years. And Neil Gaiman has a extensive bibliography. He is a phenomenal writer that has such a unique and quirky voice, from his comic books such as Sandman to his novels such as Coraline to his darker, more surreal stuff to his more sweet stuff to Good Omens, all the stuff that we seem to know. But I thought I would pick some books. I've picked 6 books that I think are a nice read across Neil Gaiman, or where to start with Neil Gaiman, because you could be here for a long time with his work, because there's loads of it. Some you may have heard of, some you may have seen in other formats, some you may have already read, but I try to pick the ones that either felt the most accessible, or actually probably the easiest to get as well. So I tried to pick books, a good starting point with these 6 books, because Neil Gaiman is a phenomenal writer, and I fell in love with his work in my teens, and I just have kind of read everything that man has ever written. You know, he's one of them. He's one of those writers, iconic, almost. So, tell me what you think in the comments of this list. Please watch to the end. Let's start this one, shall we? The Graveyard Book. Neil Gaiman has written across readerships, so he's written adult, YA, and kids books. This is a young adult novel, and this is probably his most sweet book, if you can call it that. He had the idea when he is in the 80s, when his sons were little, peddling around in a graveyard, and he thought he could write something like the Jungle Book, but set in a graveyard. And each chapter of this sets 2 years apart as the main character grows up. And you have a boy who lives in a graveyard with his ghosts, who raise him, effectively. It's a Jungle Book story. It's sweet and charming, and it's actually really sad in places, and you have these brilliantly written little characters that just emerge out of nowhere, that just have so much to give, and the end of the book is going to break your heart, but it is genuinely so sweet. There is a couple of different versions: the original novel version, an illustrated edition, and I've heard talk of a graphic novel. I don't know if that's true or not, so don't quote me. There is also a children's edition, which is another illustrated edition. This is a stunning little story, and one that I think you will adore. So, from gothic fairy tale set in a graveyard to an adult novel about a shooting star, Stardust by Neil Gaiman. This one is the book that got me into the Gaiman. I remember reading this as a teenager and being blown away by it. I love fairy tales. I do. And this is kind of for want of a better word, somewhere between magical realism and urban fantasy mixed with fantasy. And it kind of reminds me of kind of the very pre-Tolkien fantasy novels. Yes, they did exist. Basically, Tristan sees a shooting star, he's in love with a girl, and goes over the wall. It takes place in a small rural town in England, and there is a wall dividing this world and the magical world. And this is a sweeping, it's like an adventure, and it starts off as this sort of sweet fantasy and becomes a swashbuckler and then becomes a little bit gothic, and it's just a really sweet novel. I adore his writing style, I adore the characters, I adore the fact that he's not scared to go to a little bit of pop culture with this one. There is a version of this from 2007 by DC Vertigo imprint, which includes new artwork and 50 pages of new material. There is also interest in turning it into a musical. I don't know if that's true or not. The film is stunning, and I adore the film. This is just such a fantasy love story. Tristan is a fun character, and it's beautiful. I would wholeheartedly recommend this one. That's why it made the list. Coraline, a dark children's novel or novella by Gaiman. This was turned into the film, which still freaks me out horribly. And they basically, Coraline and her loving parents move into an old house that's been divided into flats. And you have sort of this interplay of these weird, quirky characters, and I'm not going to say too much, because I think we already know the story of Coraline. But the characters are funny, the world is funny, it's not scared to go to that dark place, and that's why I love it. I mean, her other mother terrifies me, and I mean, even in the book form, she's creepy, and it's kind of her adventures to try and stop everything that's going on. And it's one of those genuinely creepy, dark. I mean, all you would have to do is tweak the writing slightly, and this would be a brilliant gothic fantasy. Again, this is a children's book. It's dark. It's creepy. It deals with a lot of stuff that is the darker side. And as children, I think we like being scared. And I remember reading Coraline for the first time. I was probably about 19 and being so horribly creeped out in the best way possible. And the characters are lovely. Coraline is brilliant. The parents are quirky in their own unique way, in their own Gaiman way. And the cat, who I absolutely adore. So yes. Oh, and the other mother will absolutely terrify you, an evil sorceress. And, yeah. But yeah, that's Coraline. Do check that one out. Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman. So he basically is retelling the story of Norse gods and the adventures that they have. And with his typical wit, cynicism, and sarcasm, brilliantly written, hilarious in parts. I have an obsession, if you know me well enough, I have an obsession with Norse mythology anyway. And just this brilliantly written book. It's hilarious. It's dark. It's funny. I love the characters. I love the way that it just flows and feels completely self-identifying. And it's not scared to kind of laugh at itself in places. That's the only way I can describe it. He can laugh at himself, and I adore that. And Norse Mythology is actually, I think, the newest book on the list. It came out in 2017, and there's many adaptations. There's a brilliant BBC4 broadcast featuring Derek Jacobi as Odin. Like, that's good casting, despite being anti-Stratfordian. But yeah, I mean, it's a brilliant little book. There is a comic adaptation, which I've yet to read. The audiobook's very good. But I love the fact that it's just a nice... I think I'd recommend this one if you want to know anything about Norse mythology. This is a really good place to start, because it breaks it down and puts it into very modern English. And it's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And side note, the cover is gorgeous. I'm not really a book cover person, but the cover of this is stunning, with Thor's hammer. Anyway, but yeah, that's Norse Mythology by Gaiman. American Gods. Now, this is a fantasy novel that deals with... It blends kind of Americana, fantasy, and very standards of ancient and modern mythology. It's a stunning novel, and it was turned into the television adaptation, which is stunning. And I mean, seriously, this is absolutely up there as one of my favourites. You have Shadow, who is an ex-convict. He's released from prison. early when his wife is killed in a car accident. He's devastated by her death and learns that her death alongside his best friend was whom she was having an affair. And he ends up taking a job for a mysterious conman, Mr. Wednesday, and travels with him across America. You meet the other gods, you meet these characters in this sort of big, sweeping Americana fantasy novel, which I adore. The characters are brilliant, and you have this blend of all this mythology and all of this stuff squirming together. The old gods, Mr. Wednesday, who is Odin, Loki. You have Horus and Beast and Bastet, and you have this list of them. Then you have the new gods like Technology Boy, Media, the Black Hats, Mr. World, and it's just this massive novel. It's massive and it's brilliant and it's sweeping. The audiobook is stunning. There's a full cast audiobook that's stunning of this. There is an unabridged original adaptation, and then there's a full cast version, which I highly recommend both, but I love the full cast. The television adaptation was brilliant as well. American Gods is a stunning novel, and one that's going to take you for this massive journey.